Hello, I'm Nicholas Love, Chief Executive Officer with the Color Group, and I have the privilege of being joined today by one of the top 25 dope thinkers to watch in 2026, and that's Ava Torro. Let me give you a little bit of background around Ava. So Ava's a seasoned insight strategist and agency insight lead at Reddit, where she bridges the gap between cultural behavior and brand impact. With over 7 years of experience spanning audience research, trend forecasting, and strategic communications, Ava helps Fortune 500 brands decode consumer behavior and translate it into actionable insight-led strategies. Ava is the author of a Consumer Climate Report and has previously worked at Twitter, Zenith, and yes, I'm still calling it Twitter, Zenith and more. But she's no stranger to the speaker circuit either, with past appearances at MRMW, the WPP Convergent Conference, Render AI, and she also joined us for the inaugural 2025 Dope Thinkers Only Conference. Ava is a graduate of the University of Georgia, the other G, for my grand fam who might be tuned in. Was recognized again as one of the top 25 dope thinkers to watch for 2026. Ava, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
No, thank you so much for the invite. Thank you so much for what you're doing for the community, for marketing at large. I am more than happy to be here and just being a part in interacting and networking with someone that really went to the school, invested in the community, and then came back to give back in a big way. Participating with Dope Thinkers in the Color Group has been just such a treat over the past year and a half, so happy to be here.
Much appreciated. Well, we've talked about the accolades, right? And so you certainly got, the receipts to back it up. But beyond that, let's first and foremost ask probably a fundamental question, and that's central to you, and that is, who is Ava Torro?
Who is Ava Torro? I feel like I get that question a lot. And I would say Ava Torro is a collector and explorer of experiences. Even as a kid, I always was curious about people, always networking. For a lot of people that know me, my dad is an entrepreneur, and my mom is a teacher. So they both have very people-facing roles. And I got to shadow both of them as I grew up. My mom worked right next door to my school, so I was sitting in her classes. I was watching how she interacted with students. And my dad taught me selling and marketing, and he, to this day, is still the most rewarding part of his job is talking to people and learning about different experiences. And I think all of that really fed itself naturally to the career progression that I had. Going into marketing when I was in school, going into agency, going into social. I hadn't even planned to go into social media companies. I also say Twitter because I worked at Twitter. I did not work at X. I was out the door before that happened. So being able to just always be in places and opportunities to explore how, why, and when people did things, it was always naturally a curiosity for me. And being able to articulate and synthesize things and experiences for other people to understand. My friends like to say, I know my way around a metaphor, and that's because it's the easiest way to kind of recontextualize something for someone to better understand. And I just up-leveled that skill to being something that I do at the enterprise level.
Got it. So we talked earlier that you sit at the intersection between cultural behavior and brand impact. And certainly we've seen some brands who've gotten it right, and we've seen many who haven't. Quite frankly, Dope Thinkers Only actually has a series called That Ain't It, right? Where we actually identify and talk a little bit about brands who kind of missed the mark. But sitting in the roles that you've held, why is that intersection so important from your perspective?
I'll take it from an altruistic and a realistic POV. And I'm going to start with the realistic. The realistic idea is that it saves money. It saves revenue. It saves on operational costs. It saves on marketing costs. Being able to actually find this intersection of consumer wants and business needs and making sure that we're allocating the right money to product development, allocating the right targeting and creative strategy to marketing. These things, when they're done in a vacuum or when they're done with only one party in mind, we notice that, of course, there are outliers, and if it's an awareness campaign, you'll probably be okay. If it's a large, broad product, you'll probably be fine. But more often than not, that's not the case. And we have to be able to provide people with what they need, the way they need it, and also make sure we're hitting our business goals. So by starting with a product, for example, when it's an ideation, if you haven't done any focus groups, any IDIs, any survey analysis, or need and product placement, then when that actually goes out to launch, you wonder, well, why isn't it scaling the way as it's supposed to? Why am I not seeing the return as quickly? And why is it not fitting into the market? Because you didn't lead with the audience. You led with getting it done quicker to save money. You led with cutting back cost on the wrong part that actually was the most important to people. But these types of things, it saves businesses money. From the altruistic side of this, I grew up always seeing things that were never made for me. It never told my story. And when things started to tell a story that was a little bit more diverse, we noticed that it was done with a stereotypical mindset involved. One of the examples I like to give, before we get into the cultural standpoints of these, we can even get more granular at a DMA level. There was an ad that was placed in the New York subway. This was a very long time ago. It's a very old marketing story. And essentially it says how fast-paced New Yorkers are moving and how they're always going super fast. New Yorkers hated it. It was terrible. They petitioned to get the ads taken down. It was an entire thing. Because even in that moment, it didn't lead with the consumer and the audience. New Yorkers don't see themselves as fast. They don't see themselves as quick-paced. They see everyone else as probably slow, but research would have been able to contextualize of New York culture. What are some of the most important facets? Oddly enough, one of the biggest things that New Yorkers love talking to people about, whether people will realize it or not, is the water. So the water quality, the water, how it's used for baked goods, and that's why bagels and anything baked that you get out of New York tastes so much better than other places. There's a lot of love for the water there. But that's such a niche thought that appeals to such a broad audience that it would be easy for a corporation to overlook it. And you need to have researchers, marketers who are in these seats to be able to recognize and take themselves out of it for a moment as a business and say, looking at this product, looking at this headphone, if I'm a regular consumer, what does this mean for me? How does it change my life? Is it supposed to change my life? All of these questions really let brands also reduce the time it takes to go through A/B testing, reduce the amount of time where it takes to reallocating targeting 5 or 6 times for optimization. But everyone could be served. This is a 2-bird, 1 stone type of solution and strategy.
So it's interesting, as you were sharing that perspective, my mind couldn't help but go to a previous conversation that I recently had. And I was speaking with Celeste Warren, who also was at the Dope Thinkers Only conference, one of the 25 Dope Thinkers to watch for 2026. And one of the questions that I asked her was, because she spends a lot of time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that I asked her was, well, from her perspective, why did she feel like diversity was so under attack from a certain administration that I won't give the dignity of identifying who that is, but if you know, you know. And so one of the things that she said was, it really didn't make a lot of sense because just through the lens of business, right, diversity exists without the idea of race, right? Diversity of thought, diversity of age, diversity of background, right? And so, for a long time, people have typically over-indexed with this lens. And as you were talking, right, my mind went to this conversation from the perspective of leading with consumer first, leading with insight first. And if businesses today desire, right, to be global in scale, global in profitability, right, then what works for a particular demographic, a particular, DMA, right, it's not going to necessarily work with a degree of scale that's going to lend you profitability that's ultimately going to allow you to sustain your job if you're in a decision-making role. From your perspective, I'd be interested in hearing when you're talking about the differences on behaviors, right? Because there's a difference between beliefs and behaviors. But when you're talking about the differences in behaviors, what role does cultural intelligence play in trying to drive your point home?
It plays a role in which it takes a lot of education. So I love that we're leading this conversation with behaviors. I piloted the multicultural research at Reddit. So one of the first multicultural bodies of work that we got out was specifically around the queer community and Reddit's role in the gender and sexual identity journey that an individual could be having. And even when I was approaching this subject and thinking back to some of how brands and sellers and advertisers were asking about this audience, I noticed that I was now tasked with positioning an audience in a spotlight that was revenue based without having to, one, denigrate this audience to just a few numbers, just a few stereotypical pullouts and takeaways. I wanted to be able to tell an authentic story as well as a story that ends in strategies, because at the end of the day, the research that I personally do, it's completely different from healthcare research. It's different than other types of research. My research is going to always be tied to revenue, but that does not mean I have to provide insights and perspectives that are not authentic to the audience. So I personally, while I'm an ally, I don't identify as queer. So I'm even going into this research with a level of cultural ignorance. You know, of course, it's one thing to have friends, but I am not immersed in the culture in that way. Right. So even when I'm thinking about my research approach, I immediately start asking, well, why don't we just leverage the employee resource groups that we have at the company? So this touches on some of your earlier notes that Celeste mentioned of the rolling back of DEI and DIB does not serve in a positive. You know how difficult it is to get multicultural. And when I say multicultural, and this is something that I talked about at MRMW, I talked about at CES this year, it's multicultural is anything that's not white, cis, American male. That means everything else is considered multicultural. And that's even down to neurotypics. So even that person I laid out, they're also neurotypical, and that adds an additional layer. Right. So how do we make people realize we're othering this group and othering all of ourselves because we're trying to lead with demographics people can't control? And when we take a step back, outside of getting that granular, we end up at behaviors, interest, community. We're ending up where we're being able to tell stories about the Black nerd. I was getting research on Black anime, for example. In some of my myth-busting research, it was going through, I was mainly given a lot more wiggle room around tentpole moments, or tentpole months, as you would say, and being able to come to those months with some myth-busting insights. So one of them was, there was a misconception that Asian American audiences over-indexed for anime more than any other audience. And this was around 2023, 2024. And the reality was, actually, the top growing demographic for anime is Black Americans. It was around 71% year over year in terms of either watching, interest, or consuming online or digital content that was around anime. And that the largest growing genre for Asian Americans was actually drama at the time. So let's say I'm in an entertainment brand, I'm working with this mindset of, I like to be careful with trigger words, like stereotypes. I like to call it when people want to personify the perception of a person and not the reality of a person. So they may be thinking like, oh, the perception is Black people aren't into anime, so if we're Crunchyroll or we're Netflix trying to market Castlevania, I may not add them to my targeting list. I may not think about them in creative development because I don't know that they're an audience that is top growing by double digits year over year, more likely to invest and download and subscribe. I don't know that because I'm leading with the personification of a person. But when you bring in research, I was getting oohs and ahs from large companies, very big companies that were like, I had no idea Black people were into anime. I had people messaging me on the side, and this was just one of my regular C-suite research meetings. This wasn't anything that I thought I had like tucked in. They were just so many people that felt seen in it. People that were like, we have to redo our entire approach to how we were going to figure this out. So I think it's an opportunity to educate and dispel some of those personifications.
So basically your DMs was popping like homecoming.
Look, I was like, oh my gosh, like, no, I didn't even know I said any, because we know these things. Like, I think this is the uniqueness, and this is where I'm gonna, maybe get on my pro-black and brown and multicultural and people of color box. We have to naturally, as people that live in a country, specifically Americans within all of our diasporas, we have to know how to interact with other cultures in order to survive. Right. We have to know how to interact with other cultures in order to fit in, to grow. Like code switching, it exists across any diaspora in which you have a language barrier, a dialect barrier. We have to do these things. Every other person outside of people of color or people that have specific diversities that they cannot hide and they can't change in their speech, you would naturally have an empathy for other. And by empathy, I mean the ability to look on both sides of the table so that you can navigate a moment. And that's where I feel like, because we don't have a high concentration in this industry, that's why even when the research is provided, some researchers do still lean into those personifications when it comes to focus group development, survey writing. And the best thing we can do is continue to bring other people, especially the young kids, into the interest of this type of industry, show the impact and the amount of skills that you can take from this industry and go to other types of jobs, and really increase the saturation of people here that naturally have that skill of empathetic research.
The personification of personas was like a bar. You mentioned a trigger word for me, which is mythbuster. So let's do a mythbuster. What's the biggest mythbuster we can attack in terms of perception of Reddit right now?
That there isn't a place for you there. I think the biggest myth right now is, who is actually on there? It's just coders, it's just men, it's just white people. And the reality is the breadth of duality and the breadth of variety that is available on the platform for a person to just really explore not being a monolith. One of my mentors at the company, a researcher by the name of Laura Oxford, when we were working together on our Hispanic narrative, she introduced me to that concept of not flat, and how Reddit specifically is a place where a person isn't flat. For example, when I'm on LinkedIn, like you talked about, I am one of the Dope Thinkers 2025. I'm one of the 25 Dope Thinkers. I'm Significant Insights 30 Under 30 winner. I am working at Reddit. I'm author of the Climate Report. Those are the things that I have to be seen for there. They don't know about Pilates on LinkedIn. They don't know about the parts of me that likes to play Madden with my little cousins. And while I really don't like having to move the camera back and forth, they don't know these about me. They don't know like that I'm not a natural blonde. They don't know these things. So being able to have a place in a space as an individual, outside of my color, outside of my race, when I want to add and bring that in, I can. There are communities for people where if you want to dive into being a mom and a gamer, we have mom gamers. If you want to dive into being black and a nerd, we have blurs. If you're like, I don't want to do anything that has to do with ethnicity and race or gender, we have so many generalistic things around, like r/thalassophobia, which is one of my favorites. It's a fear of large bodies of water, and it's where people just share images and videos of large bodies of water and stories. But it really lends itself to say that if you've always had a problem expressing yourself, if you've always felt that you can only exist in one space on a social media platform and only can have one persona, Reddit is where you can actually broaden that. And I think black and brown communities specifically, because I think it's a lot different in Asian communities, because character play and fantasy is really ingratiated in their culture. Our culture, specifically as black and brown people, it can have a little bit more conservatism, a lot more historics to it, and that specifically for audiences like us, Reddit is a place where we can cultivate and spread our wings a lot more in terms of how we show up. And people, and I know you didn't ask it, the only other myth I would bust for people is Reddit is not, and I think this is specific to communities that aren't familiar, Reddit, we don't manage those things. Like, the people that moderate, and they're called moderators or mods, moderators are regular everyday people who have just decided that I am a gamer, I want to make r/gaming. Do other gamer friends want to moderate this with me? Cool. They're not employees of the company. They sometimes don't even know each other's actual names. They're just working still behind that curtain. But Reddit is Parks and Rec. We have the land. You build what you want on it. Within reason, we have a lot of threat and safety and brand safety on the platform. So don't get too crazy, but you can really exist as all of the parts of you here. Truly.
I want to come back to that, but I want to make sure that I make this statement, because what I hear from you in terms of myth busting Reddit, right, is true community. And if you're a marketer listening to this conversation, then hopefully you're following this framework. It's something that the Color Group shares with our clients, and that's community drives reputation, which forms relationships, which drives revenue, right? And so there's a lot of social platforms that talk about community, but it's more algorithmic driven, right? I mean, you're seeing some emergence of threads, right, where they're trying to do some things. But for the most part, when you look at the grand scheme of things, if you're not necessarily in a group, right, and people aren't frequently logging into groups on a daily basis, right, unless they truly feel a sense of community, which is rare when you're talking about other platforms that won't be named. But I really hear an emphasis on community, and so brands and marketers should probably start to look at Reddit a lot differently, particularly as they say, multicultural lens in terms of how they're launching go-to-market strategies and campaigns. But I want to come back to you as a person, right? And if you had an opportunity to give your 25-year-old version of yourself some advice, what would you say?
Go blonde sooner. I would say don't be intimidated in rooms that want you to feel intimidated. I think there was a lot of times in my early career it felt like I had to play my space in a space. And it felt like it was easier to navigate. It felt like I was always given a lot more support. It felt easy. It was like, oh, it's Ava. Like, she, is sweet. She's nice. I wasn't trying to take up space in rooms. And I also, at that time, I would tell her, continue quietly learning as well, though, because I was able to navigate spaces before I felt like I had something to provide to those spaces outside of attendance. I sat, I learned, I listened. I attended things that I had no idea I was supposed to be at, and now it's something that's a part of my regular cadence. One of my mentors, Sequoia Glenn, she is actually the one who started me on my international circuit. She specifically sat me down last year. It feels like it's been so much longer. She sat me down. We were sitting at a coffee shop, and she said, so go ahead and take off. You're coming to Davos with me for World Economic Forum. I said, cool, not a problem. What's that? What am I? And even when I'm thinking, I'm telling certain people who are very surprised that I got an invite and that I'm going to this. So those who knew, it was shock and how did you get that? What have you been telling? What have you been telling people? What are you doing? And the people that didn't know, it was okay. What does that even mean? So it felt like I was in this real in between of feeling lucky, which is a word I want to be very careful with in this conversation.
Please.
Yes. Feeling lucky, and then feeling like I am struggling to figure out where I belong in this. And I'm happy that 25-year-old me didn't listen to any of this, that she continued to foster through. But I think there was a lot of other spaces where I could have spoken up more. I could have really showcased my knowledge and my drive sooner if it wasn't for me feeling intimidated or oh, I'm the youngest person here, or I don't have as much experience, so I maybe shouldn't jump into this conversation even though I hear something that sounds off. Maybe I should be more, all of these second guessing moments where it was just me speaking up. I definitely would tell her, don't overthink it, just say it. If they don't want to hear it, if they don't take the advice, I promise you someone in that room heard what you said and hurt something out of you, even if the crowd didn't want to acknowledge it. And I learned that like a lot later, when people would really come up to me at the end of things and say like, hey, I know everybody didn't say anything, but like what you said made a lot of sense. Can we put on some time to talk about X, Y, and Z? Or I can't wait to hear when you have this next thing. It started getting this validation where if 3 or 4 people said they liked what I said at a conversation or at a speaking engagement, I've done my part. That's it. I've done my part to hit the people in the room that needed to hear what I had to say, and putting that mindset in and making sure I'm catering it to the message I know is needed for an audience versus trying to fit a narrative for a broader audience. And that just, it doesn't work the way, it's not scalable.
Let me ask you a very direct question, actually, after hearing you say that.
Direct.
Imposter syndrome is a term that, for whatever reason, has a negative perception with the term. Do you view imposter syndrome as something negative?
I view it as negative as you do procrastination. It's at the same level as procrastination. If anything, it could be a chicken or egg situation, but it's one of those things where for some people, it gives them drive. I know some people, and I'm saying people in general because it's something that's not agnostic to any gender or race,
right.
But it's, some people tell me that their imposter syndrome is why they keep striving for more. It's what keeps them going. It's what keeps them focused. Like they're competing with themselves or the perception of them, their perfect self so much that now that's their driver to success. Other people, they found it to be the weight that was holding them back. And when they were finally able to let it go or find ways to navigate through it, they shot up. I personally had that experience. I had the experience of once I started to let some of that go, and even still navigating the newer rooms and that new level that I get of imposter syndrome, being like the people I'm in rooms with now, it was different when it's like, oh, you're in the room with the director. You know, no hate, no shade, but it's like, okay, it's a director, it's a manager. I'm in a room with ambassadors. You know, I'm sitting down talking to the president consort of Botswana, and that's a whole different mental level of navigation. But if I don't learn how to navigate that first, I don't pop off. So I think it's very determinate on the person, but it's up there with procrastination. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's something you can navigate. It's something that you can work towards. It's gonna always, I think, come up sometimes. The same way, like even when you don't have asthma, you may not have an attack for decades, and then one day you get an attack. You know, certain things are a part of our natural chemistry as humans, and we have to figure out how to navigate past that. My dad always liked to say, you know, kids survive their parents. I think we can survive some of our shortcomings without ever having them fully been eliminated.
Yeah, so let me share with you what I hear now. So for me, there's a difference between imposter syndrome and lack of experience. Right? And I think oftentimes the two are used incorrectly are used interchangeably.
Yes.
Okay. To me, imposter syndrome is truly faking it till you're making it. Like you literally know you don't know anything about this certain thing, right? But the pride in you is seeking something, right, to get you to a certain point because you're seeking something. Then there's the lack of experience, right? You've done the work, but you haven't experienced this certain level. You haven't experienced this scenario, right? But what's inside of you is strong enough to be justified to be in that role, to be in that room. And so the reason why I'm saying this to you, and I remember the first time you and I had a conversation, right? It took me 5 minutes, you're like, oh yeah, no, she's a dope thinker, right? And so as I've been hearing you kind of talk a little bit about your journey, how you've navigated intimidation, the type of advice that you would give, you know, your 25-year-old self. And the reason why I asked about imposter syndrome is I wouldn't view what you just described as imposter syndrome. I would view it as lack of experience, right? And the more that you continue to rise, the more that we collectively continue to rise, there's always going to be scenarios where there's a lack of experience, but you don't get to that place unless you've done enough to be justified somewhere and someone sees something in you. And so the very fact that, you know, you flew to Davos and people were asking, why did you get, because she did the work. Somebody saw something in her, right? And that something was justified enough to to be in that room. And so ultimately at the end of the day, when you get that chance, I ain't trying to sound like Eminem off of 8 Mile, right? But like, you know, you might have one shot, right? And you got to be able to deliver.
Mm-hmm. And I can definitely hear you on that, especially because, you know, the lack of experience part, and this is where I'll speak a little bit more granularly to women and minorities in that sense, and how that's where that imposter syndrome and experience kind of merge together for those specific groups. Honestly, because a lot of the people in the room don't look like you and I, but they've gotten in that room with less experience than us and less actual skill sets than us. It could be a mix of networking, the imposter syndrome as you lay it out, faking it till they make it, and now they're in the room and people aren't really questioning things too much. The issue I was navigating was I was in the room with people who were supposed to have more experience than me, supposed to have more knowledge than me. They didn't, and I still felt other. And there is a world in which that 25-year-old me, and this is something I've heard a lot of other Black women say, specifically Black women, say when they have white male mentors or white male sponsors for their careers, or white men that sit on their internal executive boards. They say, like, you know, he tells me, walk in there like you're a white man to everything. Like, don't think about anybody else in the room's experience. You know, before you get in there, have a short list of the people that actually are stakeholders in the conversation. Everything else is noise, and you are the thought leader expert in every room. Nobody, like, the way, like, having a white male mentor really contextualizes you on how they think in rooms and then passing that knowledge along. I find that to be the best version of allyship that I experienced. And I know that other Black women with similar white male mentors have. That is the form of allyship that changes the way you think about things. That's the form of allyship where we always wonder, like, you know, where do they get the gall? Where do they get the cojones to come in here and do? It's a mindset. It truly is a mindset, and it's a mindset that I'm still honing myself. But it does change how you go into rooms. Like, when we go into rooms, we want to make sure, because the Black people in this industry, overachievers, we are used to having checklists. We are used to getting everything written out. We're used to attribution. We are used to being like, hey, well, we're not used to a minimum viable product. If it's not perfect, we don't understand why you want to release it. If it's not honed up tight and nice, why did you even let it out yet? It's not ready. It's not going to be ready until the cake is fully cooked. That's not how they think. MVP, minimum viable product thinking, has really helped me. And mind you, I'm talking like within the last year and a half. So this is something I'm still working on. But moving into that mindset, and you just need, at the end of the day, X has to be out. You're not going to get everything from A to Z out. X and Y will get out. And that's enough. Just get it out. That's how they're able to get businesses out, done, closed, sought, bold, bought, resold, new company. And those companies weren't together. They didn't have their NDAs tight. They didn't have that logo changed 3 times while they were live. Nobody noticed it. You know, sometimes we just have to hit the ground running, and you don't have time to think about imposter syndrome after that. You don't have time to think about what my skill set is versus the other person. All I can be focused on is getting myself down the finish line.
Yeah. No, I think there's power in being comfortable in iterating. There's power in having firm legs on unstable ground, right? And it's interesting because I try not to chuckle, but, you know, as you shared with regards to this example of allyship, right, in terms of walking there like a white male, I totally understand the sentiment. It's not the first time that I've heard that, particularly from a Black woman, but I couldn't help myself but think about all the situations that I've been in and wonder why I've never been told to think like a white man.
Now look, we could go into the deeper contextualization of competition and white men and Black men in different spaces. You know, I don't have, like, you know, that there's a lot of Black men who do say they have white male mentors, but I will say I do personally notice, specifically within tech. I won't even put this specifically on marketing. I will say in tech, and probably a good amount in marketing, a lot of Black women I know, and Hispanic women as well, have white male mentors. Now, mind you, that story does not always play out great in general, but more often than not, the stories that I have been told in the allyship I've seen, they bring them to events, they put them on with different clients. The competition mindset isn't really there between Black women and white male mentors. And I don't know if that's by design, because at the same time, we can't negate the fact that even with this, over 600,000 Black women in tech still don't have jobs or have been laid off in the last year or two. So everybody's allyship across the board needs to step up, specifically for Black women across the board in media, tech, and adjacent fields, because that number is ridiculous. And these are women who have multiple degrees. These are women with years of experience, women who are trying to take positions 2 to 3 levels below themselves just in order to have something to have ends meet and reclimb the ladder, and they're not letting people, Black women, back on. And that's where we need to see. It's one thing to tell somebody to go in the room like a white man. I need you to be the white man in the room to tell them to bring more of us in the room. That's the allyship that is needed in this new season.
And I'll clear my last statement because I know somebody watching this video like, yo, Nick is crazy. But when you talk about allyship, I mean, I personally, until recently, my mentorship infrastructure was predominantly Black women and white women who had actually invested in me. Up until recently, with the emergence of Monday Night Mentorship, led by Jabari Hearn and Julian Duncan and a lot of people who came over from the Adweek Executive Mentorship Program, a lot of my mentors throughout the years had either been white women or Black women. So I 10x to this idea of really increasing and expanding allyship, for the collective. As a color group, right, we define a dope thinker as someone who's elevating categories, products, and people through the power of inclusive and diverse intelligence. And, certainly, we've talked a little bit about you speaking at the Dope Thinkers Only conference. Obviously, you were named a dope thinker to watch in the year of 2026. And as I shared with you in our first conversation, it wasn't hard to identify that you demonstrated dope thinking characteristics and traits. So from one dope thinker to another dope thinker, I would love to hear from you. Who's another dope thinker that you know, that many may not, that they should know, and what makes that person a dope thinker?
Oh, 100%. And even when you asked this question, I really wanted to highlight our global impact of the diaspora specifically. So I really want to highlight Wakani Hoffman. And those who may or may not know Wakani Hoffman, she is a researcher who works with the Inclusive AI Lab. And essentially, this is where she's leading this humanity link and these African and AI clusters. Essentially, she's working to challenge the narrative that AI does not have to worry about being trained on culture, on diasporas. She's really focusing on centering this relational intelligence, indigenous knowledge, community-led design, so that AI has a place to truly tap into the diaspora of the African culture, to dispel a lot of the false information around cultures. And really, she's leading this ethical solution towards AI expanding its resonance and knowledge of the African diaspora, of people of different countries, and maybe, just maybe, she can help shape and change the information that is on the internet, that is going to be cited and synthesized from all of these different LLMs and chat tools, to really make sure that they see us in our multiplicity. And this is that leans back into that not flattening piece that I had brought up before. AI could be used as a tool for flattening. depending on how it's trained, depending on the sources that it's having to leverage in order to find different citations, and to have someone really develop an initiative and a strategy to attack that. I think Wakani's work is just so evolutionary and so global in mindset, getting more people involved in really understanding and rethinking what does providing intelligence to artificial intelligence look like when ethics and culture is front of mind.
Powerful, powerful. If people want to kind of link with you or connect with you, where can they find you?
Yes, I am Ava Torro. There is not a lot of Avas. Just Ava Torro, Toro like a bull. And find me on LinkedIn. I'm Ava V Torro on Instagram. Also, please subscribe to the Consumer Climate Report. This is an opportunity for me and other researchers to just come together and have thoughts about what's the weather of these different audiences. So you want to reach, trans audiences. Well, right now they're feeling a little more open to these brands and a little less open to these verticals, and here are some areas of opportunity. So it's going to be a really good place to get the climate levels of the different consumers across the world. So anyone that wants to have those types of questions, research partnerships, more than happy and excited.
And what do you do the most with love?
What do I do the most with love is, and to make sure I know what thing do I do with love the most, or how do I use, let me see how I want to read. The thing I do with love the most is spread it, spread it in how I talk to people, spread it in how I show up for people, spread it even when I don't always think I have other things to spread. I don't think I'm super positive today. I'm not feeling really on it, but if there's any opportunity for me to spread love, whether that's just being like, hey, thought about you, just that check-in that you feel on your chest sometimes, sharing something with somebody, whether it's a meme or a post or something I had just seen, and just hey, I don't know what your day's been like, but somebody thought about you today in this moment, and I just want you to know that. So the thing I do with love is spread it.
And who do you play with on Madden?
I play with my little cousins. Child, please. I just do it because I love them, and I'm like, okay. And sometimes I get into it. Now, honestly, the video game that I really like, I'm a story video game girl. So the Walking Dead series,
okay.
I love that little girl. Get on my nerves. She does the absolute most, especially those first 2 stories. But I really like the Walking Dead video. That was one I'll play by myself.
Okay. And then if you could use one word to describe you, what word is that?
I think a lot of people would just say spontaneous. I would say spontaneous because it's why if there's no reason to say no, I usually don't say no. So that makes it, when I do say no, it's a real no. But I think spontaneous, I don't say no to many experiences. I didn't say no to snorkeling and I can't swim. Still did it,
Oh, wow.
They're like, hey, you want to go skiing? Never done it. Sure, why not? You want to go skydiving? That's when you'll hear a no. But I'll say yes to everything else.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's certainly been a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again and again. Thank you so much for the partnership. You dropped some unapologetic gems in the Thrive for AI webinar. Did some really dope stuff with the Dope Thinkers Only conference, and clearly this conversation has been a joy. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Not a problem. So happy to participate and cannot wait to see the opportunities that you are going to be providing for these kids this year.
Thank you. You take care.
You too.